Good morning, everyone. We're here at the Dewey Drome, and I'm here with Andrew King. It's Saturday. It's in August, end of August time frame, week before Labor Day, put it that way. Andrew's ferrying another aircraft. This is probably his 7th or 8th.
Something like that.
He's busy this year ferrying airplanes, but this is a very unique Waco that he's going to do a little walk around. Real quick, let's talk about what's been going on. I've been barnstorming a little bit. Andrew's been hopping rides in a T6 and a Stearman over in Virginia. He's ferrying airplanes. He's receiving phone calls. That's probably a ferry flight right there. So, and I have a new addition to the family.
If you hear somebody crying, it's not us.
It's in the background. It's little baby Dewey. So she's over there content and pretty happy, sucking on her thumb and her fingers, but hopefully she'll keep at that for the next 15 minutes. But Andrew, why don't you talk about this Waco a little bit? Tell us a little bit more about you, what's going on, and you take it from here.
This is a 1927 Waco ASO. The A stood for the engine, was a Wright J5. The S stands for straight wings. The O was something else. Waco always used 3 letters to identify their airplanes, and it takes a lot to figure out what they all mean. But it was built in 27 as a Waco 10, even before they started using the 3-letter identifiers. And it had an OX5 90 horsepower V8 water-cooled engine in it with a radiator hanging under the center section of the wing, and went to Canada when it was new. It spent, I think, at least 10 or 12 years in Canada. In the late 30s, when it was about 10 years old, they ordered a brand new fuselage from the Waco factory, and they converted it to a Wright J5 engine. And that's what really makes the airplane unique. The Wright J5 engine is the same engine that Lindbergh had on the Spirit of St. Louis. They were very common, 1927, 28, 29, around in that time period. But nowadays, they're very, very rare. And I would be surprised if there's 10 or 15 Wright J5s flying in the world. So this is one of them. So the straight wing Wacos, there are quite a few around, but I think this is the only Waco powered with a Wright J5, only straight wing Waco with a Wright J5 that's flying currently. So, so a very rare airplane. In 1967, it was purchased by a guy named Dan Newman, who lived in Minnesota at the time, in Minneapolis, was a Northwest Airlines pilot. He was only 21 years old when he bought it in 67. He moved to Tucson later, brought it to Tucson, flew it around there, moved to Charlotte, North Carolina, brought it to North Carolina, flew it around there. He just sold it here in 2023, a couple weeks ago, and I was hired to fly it from Charlotte to Wisconsin and probably eventually to California. So this is the middle of the ferry flight to Wisconsin. Left yesterday morning. Hit some big thunderstorms. I disproved the theory. The Wright J5s, you'll see, have magnetos on the front of the engine, and there's always been kind of a legend that they were bad in the rain. Well, yesterday I disproved that because I went through a lot of rain yesterday, and the magnetos performed fine. So, so I disproved that. But so that's kind of the story of the airplane, and we'll do a more detailed walk around and show you some of the interesting things about the airplane. All right, come around to the front here. This is the famous Wright J5 engine. It's 9 cylinders, as I said, 790 cubic inches. It's rated at 220 horsepower at 2,000 RPM. We never run it that high. The most I've seen is maybe 1850. I think about 200 horsepower. It's an old-timey engine. I think 26 or 27 were the first ones. They had a J4 before this, which was basically the same, but this is a little bit more advanced. It has covers over the rocker arms to keep the grease inside and stuff. But it is 1927 technology, so there's no oil going to the tops of the cylinders. So you'll see grease fittings on all of the rocker arms, and so every 10 hours or so you have to hook up a grease gun to them and pump some grease into the overhead so that the rocker arms are lubricated. And there's little holes in the back where the exhaust valves are. There's little holes in the back of the rocker arm, so you just squirt oil up in there and try to squirt it on the valve stem to try to lubricate the valve stem a little bit. So that's one of the things about taking care of an old Wright J5. The other interesting thing, that for some reason they put the magnetos right on the front of the engine, which is kind of a strange way of doing it. I've only seen, I think, one other engine like that, a British Jeanette engine. But like I was just saying, they're right on the front. You could imagine in rain they'd get wet, and so yesterday I flew through quite a bit of rain, and it didn't seem to affect them. And we have always heard the legend that if you flew in rain, you might have problems with your magnetos, but didn't yesterday. But it's been a good engine. It hasn't burned much oil. It didn't drip any in the hangar floor really last night, and it's been firing right up and running pretty good. This engine, the airplane didn't fly for about 6 years, so the engine sat for about 6 years, so we're a little concerned about it. But it has about 6 hours on it now. Actually more than that, because I flew it about 3 hours down in North Carolina, so about 9 hours on it, and so far is doing pretty good. You can see down here the carburetor's mounted below as normal on radial engines. These exhaust pipes go through the air box before the air gets into the carburetor, so it has heat going all the time, carburetor heat basically all the time, and supposed to help vaporize the fuel, I think, also. So that's the Wright J5 engine.
I see it's unshielded.
Unshielded ignition, yep. He said he tried a radio and it worked okay. Generally with unshielded ignition, of course, the radios won't work because it makes too much static. So it's really a very basic airplane. Well, it has a battery in it. This one originally would have had a inertia starter. That's what this little dog here is for. And you take a big L-shaped hand crank and hook it into this, and you crank it by hand. It has the starter has a big geared down heavy flywheel in it, and you crank it till it's really whining. We'll start it up eventually, and you'll be able to listen to it. But you crank it up till the flywheel's really going, and then you pull a T-handle in the cockpit and it engages it to the engine and spins the propeller to start it. This one has been modified to have a battery and an electric inertia starter, so you can hand crank it, but you can spin it up with electricity, and that's what we normally do when we're starting this one. So eventually we'll start it and you'll hear the whine of the flywheels winding up, and then you pull the T-handle and it engages and spins the prop and starts it, hopefully. So that's one of the interesting things about it too.
And you got a generator, or wind-driven generator?
Yep, mounted on the bottom because the engine has no mount pad for a generator or alternator. So the only way you're going to make electricity is have that little wind-driven thing with a propeller on it that spins the generator and makes enough electricity just to keep the battery charged, just to use the starter. There's no radios or any other things. It does have nav lights on it. It's configured in the configuration of a Northwest Airlines airplane. Dan, the guy that owned it and restored it, was a Northwest Airlines pilot. The gold wings and the black fuselage were the Northwest house colors back in the 1920s and 1930s. And so he restored it. They did use straight wing Wacos like this to fly the airmail and to fly passengers. And so that's why he restored it in that configuration. But it has the nav lights, the night flying equipment. It has cockpit lights on the instrument panel, so you can see the instruments at night, and the great big landing lights, which of course we'll focus on here. One on each wing, and when you flip them on, the ammeter needle goes way down to discharge. They use a lot of electricity to turn the landing lights on. But we taxied around a little bit last night with the landing lights on in the dark, and I thought, man, I can't imagine flying this thing in the dark because you still can't see anything forward. It's still very blind. The landing lights shine out in front and shine on a lot of stuff you're not going to see anyway. So landing gear has these tall, skinny tires, typical of the time, 30 by 5s. They're 30-inch diameter, 5 inches wide, 20-inch wheels. They were meant for landing in rough strips. Cow pastures and the airports back then weren't always very smooth. So these great big round wheels and tires tend to roll over bumps well. They make it a little bit tougher to land on modern paved runways because there's only a little bit of contact area on the ground. And the more contact area you have, the more stable the airplane is. So with just a little bit of contact area, it tends to make the airplane dart left and right a little bit. But this one, they seem to be aligned very well. I've landed it exclusively on pavement till I got here. And this one, I'm very pleased with how it lands. It tracks straight, and it has a locking tail wheel that you can lock straight. And I prefer steerable tail wheels where you can actually steer them. This one locks straight. And you can steer with the rudder till it slows down a little bit, and then you need to use the brakes a little. And the brakes work okay, which is good. A lot of these airplanes, the brakes barely work at all, or they work too much. And these brakes work pretty good. So I'm very happy with how the airplane flies and lands and operates.
What about the outrigger gear? You're talking about there?
Yeah, when this airplane was new, when it was a Waco 10 in 1927, it would have had, these are the shock struts, the shock absorber struts. You can see how much they don't move that much, but they probably move 2 or 3 inches, and I'm not sure if there's springs in there or air or what's in there. But when it was new in 1927, it would have had a long shock absorber strut that attached all the way up here and went straight all the way down to the axle down here. And those are supposed to be not as good as far as landing and taking off and staying straight and stuff. This is a more advanced gear. When they ordered a new fuselage from the factory in 1938, they sent them this fuselage. It has these double braces here. Some of them only had one, but it has what we call the outrigger, because it comes out here and then goes down from there. So this is called the outrigger gear, and it's a better landing gear than the original landing gear. But in 1938, they would have been, if they supplied a fuselage, it would have had, of course, the most advanced features on it. So that's why 1927 Waco has outrigger landing gear on it. AM9, people ask what the AM9 is. That was, it's contract airmail. Sometimes it says CAM with the number on it, but the government was flying the mail during 1918 to, I think, the early 20s, and they decided to go to the civilian market. I think maybe 1925, something like that. So they put out contracts for various airmail routes. Northwest got the contract for airmail Route 9, which was from Minneapolis to Chicago. I think they stopped in Madison, Wisconsin, and a couple other places along the way. But so the AM9 is airmail 9, or contract airmail 9. And number 5 would have been ship number 5, Northwest ship number 5. And then, of course, the old Northwest logo on there. The front cockpit carries 2 people normally, and you can see the door that's an entrance door right there. This one has it covered over in the mail plane configuration, as if you were just going to carry mail bags up there. And I think mail was really made their money in the early days. Most of the airlines, passengers were still a little skeptical of flying, and so the airmail contracts really kept a lot of the airlines in business back in the late 20s. It's got 4 ailerons. It's got ailerons on all 4 wings, which really, it banks well, it maneuvers well. I'm sure it would do loops and rolls easily. I haven't done any loops and rolls in it, and probably won't have my stuff in it, but it does. It's very maneuverable. The cockpit is pretty roomy. I think it's about 35 inches wide at the front cockpit, so it carries 2 people pretty easily in the front cockpit. Even modern people fit in there okay. There's mixture control, and there is an alternate heat thing on the right, the little knobs on the right. You can see the T-handle for it says starter pull. That's to engage the starter after you wind it up. Down on the floor on the right-hand side is the energize button you use with your foot, like an old car. And you push on that with your foot till it winds the starter up to a certain RPM, and then you pull that starter handle and engage it to start. Mag switch is there. On the floor, there's a brass booster magneto, which you can spin by hand. It sends an extra spark to the cylinders to help starting. This one, we haven't had to use it. This one starts okay just on the regular magnetos, but that's what that brass unit on the floor is. And then the other instruments are fairly normal. The big wooden control stick is kind of neat. It's kind of fun holding onto a big wooden control stick. And then the rudder pedals on the floor originally would have had a rudder bar, just a bar that went across left and right, and you put your feet on the end of it like an old-fashioned sled to steer the rudders. But we think in Canada in the 30s, we think they converted it to the rudder pedals, which actually work more easily than the bars. Actually was a pretty good improvement. They did a pretty good job on that. And then on the left side here, take my helmet out, is the throttle lever, normal throttle lever, forward and aft. And the fuel shut off below that, and then down on the floor is an old-fashioned brass pyrene hand pump fire extinguisher, in case you had an engine fire or something on the ground. Obviously, you could use it in the air. You were kind of up the creek, but most of the airmail pilots probably wore parachutes. So the airplane caught fire, they'd go over the side. So that's the cockpit. Has a baggage compartment behind the cockpit that's pretty roomy. And one of the interesting things is the baggage door, you'll see, is it has this little wire that hooks in little, they're bootlace hooks, just like on your hiking boots. And that's how you open up the baggage compartment. And it was a common thing. Some of the cowlings are held on that way. The little hatch to get into the front cockpit when the cover is on is held on that way. So this was kind of a typical Waco thing. This airplane is restored in a very authentic manner. Dan Newman and his dad were both known for doing that. There's a lot of little touches like the little boot hooks on there. If you look very closely at the front of the tail surfaces, you can see they're hand stitched. just like they would have been in 1927. So, so that's another little detail that you very seldom see on other restored airplanes. Most people, nowadays, they use modern fabric that's Dacron fabric, and you can just glue it to itself around the edges. But Dan Newman and his dad, they both were very particular about trying to do it the way it was in 1927. So that's hand stitched. There's not too much dope on it. A lot of people make the airplanes too shiny nowadays. This one is probably just about the same shine it was in 1927. So it's an excellent restoration, and I'm really happy with the airplane. It flies good. It looks right, and it's a good airplane. Gas gauge, you can see the gas gauge. Up in front of the front cockpit is the gas gauge. It has some kind of a cork unit that sticks down. There's 48 gallons in the nose, and there's a cork with some kind of a twisted rod or something on it that rotates and moves the needle for the gas gauge on there. But it's a mechanical gas gauge. It's not electric. It's a mechanical gas gauge. And then there's 12 gallons up in the center section of the top wing. That this little valve, if you turn this valve on, it'll feed the 12 gallons, and it just feeds it to the nose tank. It doesn't go straight to the engine. You have to empty out the nose tank by at least 12 gallons. Then you can open up that, and that 12 gallons will go into the nose tank and refill it. So 60 gallons total, and it burns about 12 or 13 an hour. So pretty close to 5 hours of fuel if you have all the fuel in it, which is longer than I could sit in it. That's a long time sitting in a biplane.
All right, so that kind of concludes the walk around that Andrew just did with the Waco. I don't think we've ever had an airplane at this age come here. Usually it's like 29. Have you brought anything older than the 27?
My Traveler was 28, but December of 28.
Yeah.
Like December 28th of 28.
Yeah.
So yeah, 1927 airplanes are rare. There's a lot of 1929 airplanes, a few 1928 airplanes. 1927 airplanes are very rare.
Yeah. So pretty cool. Appreciate Andrew coming by. In a couple weeks, we're going to probably have something else that's pretty cool, a big airplane. If everything goes right, probably in about a week.
Hopefully, yeah, about a week. Yep.
You'll be back through the area.
Yep.
I'll try to shoot something. You'll probably get this out 2 or 3 years later, but that's all right. It's 2023 right now. So, anyway, safe travels, Andrew, going up to Broadhead, Wisconsin. I guess just real quick, man, we had a great barnstorming carnival, great time at Oshkosh. We barnstormed Valparaiso, had a nice time there. Grassroots is in 2 weeks from now. It's a week after Labor Day. You should go there. Labor Day weekend is AAA, which is out in Iowa. I can't pronounce it, but
Blakesburg.
Yeah, Blakesburg, Iowa. But some pretty cool antique fly-ins are coming up. That's the year-end event. So, I'm still going to be hopping rides here at the Dewey Drome and around. I got a couple different events and things like that. So, much appreciated for Andrew and Jared and whoever else that helps me. Thank you. But thanks for watching our videos, walk-arounds, and we get a lot of people come up to us and say that they watch our YouTube. So appreciate it, and thanks. And until then, blue skies.
Like and subscribe. All right, here now we're going to get in, which doesn't seem like it should be hard, but this one's a little trickier because it has this front cockpit. Normally you can grab on the front cockpit. This thing, thank goodness I'm tall. I'm 6'2½", thank goodness, because it takes some long legs and some reaching around to get in it. But here's the process. And that's it. Got a good windshield. The windshield comes way back, and so you don't even need goggles to fly. So it's a good roomy cockpit, good comfortable cockpit as far as biplanes go.
Do you have shoulder harnesses?
There are shoulder harness, which they wouldn't have had in 1927, but this one does have it. So we'll put them on, we'll get it started. It'll take a little bit to warm it up. The old engines like to get warm. They're kind of cold-blooded, so we'll let it warm up a little bit and then go out and take off. Tally-ho. Oop. You know what I always forget? I always get in, I get strapped in, and then I have to get back out again.
Is there something I can do?
Earplugs.
Oh.
They're in my pocket and I can't get them once I'm sitting down. Here we go. These are a necessity because it's loud. All right, now we're ready. Go up to Springfield and tank up and then head for Rensselaer. About 9 shots of prime. Throttle is cracked. All right, so we're going to engage or energize the starter and then engage it after it spins up. Here we go. Energize.